Well, thank you, Anthony, for joining us on the Relationship Show.
No problem.
Luke and I are doing a dog and pony show today, and so he's the pony.
I'm going to politically remain neutral on that one, but okay.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah.
I'll do a little bit on your bio. I won't ponder too much on this, but it's so impressive that I just want to hit on a couple of things.
Sure.
Currently, you've created a SaaS product called Aegis that is so impressive that what I like about it is that you can give people an audit without even really needing them to do anything.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, prior to that, you've been in the security game for a long time. You're the CTO for Stay Safe. You're the CTO for Atrax, and you've been in the security expertise game for a long time. So therefore, you should be a person that people listen to, especially today in this era of threats. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, we're just going to ask a few questions about your background.
Sure.
But mainly we want to just hear from you on your perception of today's environment and why it's important to really be wary and threat conscious.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you want me to talk about my background, or are you going to ask me some questions? I don't mind either.
Go ahead. I want to hear from you first.
Okay. Well, okay. So I graduated from university with a degree in real-time systems. Why I've laboured that point in particular is because real-time systems is what the young folk of today called IoT devices. It's just been rebranded. It's exactly the same stuff that I was doing then. Why that's significant is because I've learned computing from actually physically building hardware, writing operating systems, writing applications on top of the operating systems that I wrote for a device to do something. So I've learned from the lowest levels of the operating system upwards.
You know the whole stack.
I do, and that is incredibly relevant in today's cybersecurity field. The people that we're going up against generally are those people who, so the very sort of top end of the spear are going to be those people who understand the hardware. Because most of the time, the most pervasive and most difficult threats that we face are written in a language called C. This is a language that is specifically used for writing on hardware to get the most out of the hardware. And C, the language, has been around for 40 years, something like that, right? Now, we still get threats in other high-level languages, but they're not as pervasive as the ones that we get with these particular ones. So I've written in these languages. I understand how the hardware works. So when we do have an attack, I really understand to the detail of how this thing is operating and how to mitigate against it. But anyway, so I did my degree. I graduated with first class with honours, which is the equivalent of an A+, I suppose, in other languages. I then worked for Hewlett-Packard and Oracle. So there were like three big tech firms when I was around: Hewlett-Packard, Oracle, and Microsoft. And I worked for two of the three. I then worked in an outfit from Bristol University where they actually did what people take for granted now. So all this videoing that we're doing these days, it works on an algorithm that these guys produced that I was working on, which is a guarantee of service of data delivery of packets, which is why we get such great video. I left there and I went into British intelligence. So that was lots of fun, but I had a choice of either to be have like the best career you can have, or be a father, because I had two kids then. So I decided to be a dad, and I emigrated to New Zealand where I could give them more time. I've done a sort of a variety of roles here, technical roles at the beginning, but I ended up back in law enforcement, back in the intelligence industry again. I was there in total for 7, 8 years, something like that, where I did my master's degree in computer forensics again, I graduated with first class with honours, and then I left there and I ran 2 security firms. And my current security firm is Titanium Defence. And out of that was a product, this Aegis product, because I was so frustrated that criminals had better systems than we did as companies at getting information on what they know about us. And we're being smashed because we're not keeping up with it. And what's happened is security firms have grown into this ivory tower of skills, which really separates them from, your average person, makes their, because of their cost, it's unachievable for a lot of companies to actually get a security review done, because it's just so expensive and it's really quite unnecessary. And I wanted to bring automation wherever I could.
Well, that's so refreshing, because that in itself gives the criminals a further upper hand, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Well, no, absolutely it does. And because you've got 2 problems really. One is price, like the cybersecurity firm, that price. But the other one is that clients don't know what to do with the information anyway, often, right? So I bring the 2 things together, which is my product, but I also bring some of the services to go with it to help them along to how to make themselves more secure based on the information you have or other things. And it's really cost effective. It doesn't have to cost us hundreds of thousands that we see organizations spending,
Well, let's dig into that a little bit, because
Sure.
you're offering not only your product, but also your service, and pretty much you yourself as a deep subject matter expert to companies of all sizes. That's unique.
It is. It doesn't. I mean, part of the issue, I suppose, in some ways, is it doesn't scale very well because there's one individual. We know this, but what I'm hoping though is that I can actually train enough people and get other people involved. And I am finding that companies start to look after themselves. Most people, we're not stupid. It's just they don't have the time to invest. It's a bit like learning a new language. If you invest enough time in it, everybody can speak another language. But when it's business and it's not your core business and security is just another thing you have to deal with, people push it to one side. But actually, with a little bit of training, I have found that people get into the rhythm. I introduce the rhythm for them, and then actually my best days when they don't need me anymore, or for less, when they're actually looking after their own and they're seeing the threats themselves and they mitigate. But we also, the way you mitigate a large portion of threats is inexpensive. Again, though, the problem is it's a bit like, I'd imagine, the difference between shopping in America and shopping in New Zealand. In America, there is a variety of things you can buy, competing products, all the same wrench in 100 different ways from 100 different companies. In New Zealand, where I consider it to be more expertise, actually there's only 1 or 2 you need to choose from, and that's what you buy from a security expert. Is there are all these problems, but actually the fixes are relatively straightforward, and there are a few products that will actually lift your game hugely, where security becomes an acceptable risk rather than a massive business risk, which it is now.
Anthony, can I please ask a question, Clay, if you don't mind?
Sure.
Is it true? I was just doing some research here. Is it true that the most common cyber threat facing businesses and individuals today is phishing? And then what is phishing exactly?
Well, I would say there are 2 actually things that face organizations in terms of threats, which is the insider threat, and you're right, and phishing. Those are the 2 biggest ones. Phishing emails, what that is, and I tell you what, you're going to see this go exponential, right, with the introduction of AI. Phishing emails is it's actually quite difficult to attack someone in a cyber way, right? This has normally been the realms of intelligence agencies or law enforcement, that sort of thing, because it takes quite a lot of skill to do that. Because trying to get through the defenses that an individual has, even basic ones, is quite complicated, right? Now, there's a return on investment here, even for criminals, right? They are not going to do a smash and grab in a sweet shop where they're taking a lot of risk and getting very little reward, right? No point. So what they do is they've industrialized it. So as I'm sure you know your history, the spinning jenny brought industrialization to the cottage industry that was in the UK at the time. And this one machine, the spinning jenny, did more cotton than 8 people combined in a day, right? And they've applied that same principle to cybersecurity, which is now, or cyber attacks, which is now what they're doing is that they just contact as many people as they can with a phishing email saying, you've won a prize, used to be the old one. But in there, they've got a link or a payload or something that would affect your machine, right? So what they're trying to do is entice you to install their malware. That's effectively what they're trying to do. And there's 100 different ways of doing it, right? They use psychological levers. Greed, you've won something, right? Often. Or a remittance. I suppose it's not quite greed, but it's kind of because you go, oh, I wasn't expecting that. That's awesome. I'm getting money back for no reason whatsoever, right? They always work. And these are the same levers that people use, whether they are manipulating an actual physical person for something, or like in my old industry, the intelligence industry, they're trying to get information out of you. They use the same levers, which is greed, guilt. So the other one was, we know what you're doing. We know what you're doing on your laptop. We've seen it. We've recorded it. And if you don't pay us, we're going to release the video. I have no idea, right? But everyone feels guilty immediately. And they go, okay, I'm going to pay you. And then the other one, of course, was love, right? And men and women are very susceptible to that. Normally, more women than men, but increasingly men are falling for these kinds of scams because it's one of the basic needs, you know, except for a small percentage of the population. It's one of the basic needs that we need is love, right?
Wow.
But it works because you've got to remember, like now, I'm a little bit on guard. I'm being careful what I say, making sure I don't swear. But when I'm at home, I'm in my pajamas and I've got my laptop open and an email comes in, my defenses are down. I feel secure because I'm in my castle already. I'm in a relaxed place. So my defenses are lower. So these things have a greater chance of being executed.
Wow. What's causing the increase in unauthorized access exactly? I mean, there was around 2,000 incidences that were responded to by the CERT New Zealand in Q1, which was up 12% from Q4, 35% increase in unauthorized access from Q4 2022. So, and 66% of it increase in direct financial loss, which is, yeah, I mean, why are we seeing this increase?
I think the answer to that is stats, and damn stats. Because
so everything I'll just research is just out the window. Yeah.
No, it's not that.
It's just a pointless number.
No, the stats are true, but it's not. The question was, why are we getting attacked more?
Yeah.
And that's not it. It's just that people are being forced to report more.
Oh,
because what's interesting is unauthorized access. I don't actually know what that means. I mean, I kind of do. You intuitively know what it means, but how does it fall outside of all the other categories that they've got, right? Because to me, everything is unauthorized access. You know, if it's a phishing email and you've clicked on the link and all that kind of, and they've got malware in your machine. But places like the financial authorities, they've really got good now at getting a grip of firms over here and applying really good cybersecurity to these firms, and they're making these firms report more, right? Government agencies have to report more. You know, you've got to remember that, bear in mind, it's only last month New Zealand came out with its first national security strategy. You know, the first it's ever had. So this is, but because they've now realized that actually people are actually being hacked. They can prove it, but previously there was no information, so it didn't happen, right? So what we're also seeing is that the public are now getting behind it. So again, for the first time this year, last month again, it's the first time that I can remember that the government admitted they were hacked by a foreign power, which was the Russians. I have never, ever heard them publicly admit that ever before. So to answer your question, it's such a big problem now, they almost can't hide it, or they don't want to. I'm not sure. I'm sure it wasn't intentional, but now people are now getting more used to reporting. This is a real crime, you know. So that's why that's going on.
I'd also,
Thanks.
I'd also just like to comment on that. There's,
Sure.
I call it the hijacker syndrome. Do you remember in the old days prior to September 11th, if there was a hijacker on a plane, everybody was socialized to just be still. Just the authorities will take control, and
Yep.
our job is just to not get in the way. After September 11th, no one does that anymore.
Yep.
Everyone attacks the hijacker.
Yep.
Because that is your option now. I think a similar thing is going on here. Now the public is alerted to the fact that this is happening a lot. And so we're not going to sit there anymore. We're attacking.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And even if that attack is defense, right, it's a form of resistance, right? Which I think this is kind of what you're talking about.
Yes.
You know, because I remember all the hijackings in the 70s, and you're right. The idea is say nothing, do nothing, sit still. But now these days, we all are encouraged of some form of resistance, and that's what we're trying to do now with cybersecurity. But also, we're seeing like institutions like law firms getting hit, right? And when people start thinking about that, they go, oh, actually, all my personal information that's really personal to me, like sometimes the darkest side of our being is with lawyers, and this stuff is being leaked out. You know, it's the usual thing that where I used to live, there was a corner near me. Everyone knew it was dangerous. The council knew it was dangerous, and they never did anything about it. And then a car crash, 2 people died, and then they put up a barrier the next day, right? And that's kind of the mode we're in now. And now people see danger. I think part of the issue, though, Luke, though, you have to be aware of about the stats is that then people over-report, and now everything is unauthorized access or whatever it is, you know. So stats are useful. I did in my master's degree, which was, I did it, I think it was 3 years before the cert came out. My final year project was actually showing the amount of cybercrime in New Zealand. And I calculated, based on information that I was able to get, the amount of money that was being lost. And I was able to see that there was 32,000 individual machines were involved in cybercrime in New Zealand every month. And I was the only person in the country that had that information. No one else had that information. And actually, nobody was interested either. Nobody was interested. The police weren't interested. The governments weren't interested. Nobody cared. I worked for the Department of Internal Affairs at the time. And I thought this is amazing. This is an amazing project, and nobody cared.
They care now.
Yeah, they care now. Yeah. Well, and that's interesting. Yeah, to Clay's point. Yeah. So why do they care now, and as opposed to why didn't they care back then? Is it simply because we're more educated, we've got more information at our fingertips now, or what's your take on that?
No, I believe it's because we've got international pressure, right? I think that will be the reason. What drives a lot of change in most organizations and countries and so on is, you know, if you're not helping, following suit, and you're part of a club, then you kind of get pressure to join in, right? And I think one of the biggest switches is that New Zealand has geographically been cut off from terrorism and all the kind of stuff that perhaps you and I are all very used to. You know, I grew up with terrorisms all the time. I grew up with bomb threats. I grew up with bomb alerts, right? So my understanding of threat is different. Now, part of the reason why I'm here is the threat level is so low. But now that we're connected, right, this is the bit they didn't get. You can be on the moon. If you're connected to the internet, you're as susceptible as somebody in the States or in Europe or anywhere else. And so I think the populace are a little slower to understand the issue or believe it's in their back door, right? Because it happens to everyone else, but not them. You know, so I think that's part of the reason.
Interesting. With the forensic computing as opposed to normal compute, I mean, I know the term and definition of forensic, but when it's applied to computing, I mean, you've got your honours and you know, first class there from Dublin and forensic computing. What for, in layman's terms, simply what for the people out there, what is forensic computing?
Well, I've got to be very candid that my BSc, my bachelor's, was a bazillion times harder than my master's. There seems to be a belief that master's somehow is harder than bachelor's because it's, you know, you do it after your bachelor's, and that's not the case. So forensic computing really, forensic computing is a specialization. Master's is a specialization which I took in forensics. And what that is that I gather evidence in a forensic manner that can go to court, right? In the event that we bring a criminal to court. So I did an awful lot of investigations in child abuse, for example, or those kinds of areas, and it went to court, right? And the idea is that, because as we've seen particularly recently, that the police often get bad apples in their, or occasionally get bad apples in their group, and what we have to make sure is that the evidence we've collected can be found by the defenders as well, and that I haven't placed anything in there, it's always found, and I'm able to show it in a way that the court and 12 peers can review it and actually make some judgments on what's happened. The issue for forensics for cyber, and I've seen this happen, is large organizations will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on forensics, and the answer they get is, you know, where they say, do you know who it is? And we're like, maybe, right? Attribution is really hard. And for most organizations, it's not worth it. Nobody cares, right? It's only a very few that need it. And for those very few, they will have government specialist groups to go and help them do that. But I see financial companies or banks and things all try to do attribution. It's pointless, you know.
Why is it pointless?
Well, because they're very good at hiding their tracks. They're reusing code. It's not like the old days, right? So you had certain countries were good at certain things, and they wrote things in a certain way, right? And so you know, when you're a developer or like I was, and you see bits of code, you can tell different authors because they approach things in a certain way. So groups had a certain way of doing things. They had like sort of fingerprints of data almost. That's all changed now because, as Snowden highlighted to the entire world, that we share, they used to share bits of code around, right? These different things they share. They don't anymore, I would assume. What they might do, I don't know. But cyber criminals don't care. They share code. They share what they just, because there's so many people to target that they've got that it makes no difference. So you can't like look at the code and go, oh, that's attributed to this Russian group, because it could have been made by a UK group that was sold to an American group that's then given it to somebody else, right?
Wow, I see.
Attribution's really, what I'd be interested in more forensic computing wise is it personal?
Mm.
Right? Is this attack for your bank all about, I don't know, BNZ or ANZ or something like that? Right? That's what I'd be more interested in, because that tells me that these people have spent time, like you did, finding out about your background, finding about how you operate, watching you, because there's something there that they're after. Now that's more interesting, because if they didn't get it this time, they've invested a lot of time, so they're going to come back. Right? That's where I think the value is. But trying to work out what group it is why would you bother?
Why'd you bother? Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that's so interesting from a deterrent perspective, because for every Kim.com that gets caught, there's 1,000 that don't, is what you're saying.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Groups.
From a deterrent perspective, when there's so many to go after, they're not worried. They're just going to do whatever it takes.
The best thing you can do, I think, is make it too hard to attack you, so they'll go somewhere else. Right? But if it's a targeted attack and it really is about your firm, then you have to invest a lot heavier in your cybersecurity to try and mitigate those risks, right? But for most cases, the basic things work really well.
Let's talk about that for a second.
Sure.
House security. The stats show that if you put up a camera where people, as soon as they walk up, a light goes on, infrared light, they'll walk away.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about that, because I think what you're referring to is probably what you've done with Aegis and that deterrent.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so there are the basic things that all governments are now putting out. It's the same basic things all the time, right? Which is you need to have, and I use the same analogy, right? Which is for burglars, you're right. If you have lights on, they'll most likely get deterred and they'll go to the house next door that's all in dark, because they can shroud on what they're doing. So in digital terms, what Aegis does is it highlights your vulnerabilities. Now that you know them, you can act upon them. So it's not going to be a surprise that somebody got through your toilet window, but it tells you that the toilet window is open and you've got to just go and shut it, right? And that's what Aegis does for you. And what it does is it keeps monitoring your home or your external circumference of your domain to make sure there's no easy routes in. What I find incredible is that all the clients that use it, they all have questions to their tech providers, often on what needs doing. There's lots of stuff that they didn't even know was open, including the tech providers, because the tech providers often are just trying to get the thing running for the business, right? Because that's how we're transacting daily, and they're under their own pressures. But this puts the organization in charge of their own security, and they can now have a view of what's going on. You're not blind, anymore. And so that will help you with your externals. And there are other security things that we can do to help with your websites as well, making sure they're secure, because still people collecting a lot of information through websites, right? These things are not dead. People are saying that websites are it's not true. Facebook and things are a different group of people, right? Most organizations have a professional website where you log in, and behind that login is data. People want that data. Because what's incredible, I think it's worth mentioning, is that in our day, you could go to a phone box and look up somebody's name, right? Their name and address was public domain information. These days, we consider it private, right? And that information that we used to be able to get from a phone book now has a small but value to cyber criminals, because everyone has got their own little niche, what they're doing, and they need data to do stuff, so they buy this stuff. So it's the more that you can get out and sell thousands of records, somebody's personal data, they'll buy it. And then within the organization, there are some basic things you can do to secure your systems. And it is all around things like access, putting in things like whitelisting, making sure you have a good backup strategy, These are all very basic things people need to do. And about how you run technical projects, I think the thing that blows my mind the most is that the way we run technical projects, whether it's putting in infrastructure or writing code, they're not run well. And so it often leaves risk that doesn't need to be there, right? And having good technical engineers that are running these projects, that put testing in place, even if you're just putting in a new cloud system, it's not just putting it in and getting it going, it's then how have I tested it, how have I made sure it's secure, and investing in your own people, right, as well. And I'm all about providing automation, because I appreciate not everyone can go to university and study for 6 years as I did. That's not always possible, and I'm like, that's cool. So let's give these companies automated tools that can see these things themselves, because as long as you understand the interface, you're away and you can solve a lot of these issues.
Right. So refreshing, and thank you, because what you're doing is you're taking 1,000-foot view to best serving your customers. You are not saying, I'm going to handcuff you to me and my organization, so you have to come to me, the king.
That's right.
You're training and coaching them on how to be self-sufficient in this very important area. And I thank you for that.
Well, listen, I appreciate that. But two things there. I take national security very seriously. And that includes every company that we have on our shores, whether it be a dairy to, something as large as Frontera, it all contributes to our economy. 85% of the companies within New Zealand are small companies, right? And some of them are really niche and amazing companies that are producing some amazing things, right? And I want to keep that IP here where it belongs. So my national security is one. The other thing is I have to thank my dad, God rest his soul. He was a scientist, and his belief that he put onto all of his kids is that science is about sharing information. It's not about keeping it to yourself. If you are, a true believer in humanity, I guess was his point. It's about sharing what you know. It's great that you've worked it out, but you don't wave it in front of people. You share it, right? Because if you've had the ability to solve that problem, great, give it to someone else. Then somebody else solves a problem. And then now we're starting to solve problems, and we're all sharing it together, which is what really New Zealand is based on, right? And yes, I benefit because I sell a product, but it's not extortionate. It is self-sufficient, and I'm helping you train your teams up again, because I'm hoping you'll come back and go, actually, that's such a great thing. I'm going to come back and buy another product, because this guy's actually chaining it together. What we're seeing though is this: it's taking its time to get traction, because people still believe if I spend $100,000 on a security firm, right, it's way better if I do that, because money means results. The stock exchange over here is the only stock exchange in the world that I know of that went down for 6 days. 6 days. And the only person who got in trouble was the IT manager, poor guy. He got nailed to a cross. I read the report. It was utterly biased. I did a review of it on Radio New Zealand at the time. The 2 or 3 security companies that he was giving all his money to keep him secure were never mentioned or criticised or stood next to him, right? Well, this is what I'm saying.
So they're as liable as he is what you say.
Well, they should have been.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
They should have been. And one of the things I'm doing with my clients is I help them rewrite their contracts, which is, sure, I'll hand over and I'll give you 200 grand a year to look after my security. That's awesome, and monitor it. However, when there's a problem, right, and it goes public, you're coming with me, right? I want you to stand next to me and make a statement on why we didn't catch it. Now, and I'm very sure that the guy at the stock exchange was, liable, and he's ultimately the buck stops with him. But I was just really disappointed in the reporting. He was utterly crucified for something that he wasn't entirely responsible for, because he had divulged responsibility downwards, and he was paying for a service he didn't get.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, fair point. Yeah, I mean, ultimately he outsourced to 2 companies, and it was his decision. But yeah, it would be great for them to stand collectively and all put up their hand and say, "Oh, we're all accountable here."
Well, because these other companies have got other clients, and
sure,
of course it's all covered with a layer of secrecy. So the other people most people don't know who it is. So they can't make a good buying choice.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? I much prefer a company who can actually go, look, we screwed up, we fixed it. You know, I think that's better because they become more transparent. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I just want to touch on digital identity a little bit. New Zealand's one of a handful of countries that hasn't embraced it. Have you looked at reports, or do you know any further information as to why New Zealand hasn't jumped on board?
It's one of the few times that I'm glad that we're a little bit behind the curve, I would say. I think digital identity, I mean, we've got Real Me, which now New Zealand started that, it must be 15 years ago now, right? So we have a form, we do have this digital identity in flight, but I don't think we have the infrastructure really to support it. I don't think there's necessarily a huge need for it over here yet. And it's one of those things that we really need to get our house in order a lot more first, I think, before having even more crucial data that can be at risk. You know, but having said that, the UK and the US and Canada do often lead the way in these things, but they have got a culture of security that is not really reflected here. And I think as we mature as a country, we get better, like the reporting, those stats you're talking about, as that gets better, and that we're seeing, that people are really open to reporting, and we're seeing that we can do things about it. I'm kind of glad we're lagging, really. I've put off getting a Real Me identity for that reason.
Yeah, fair enough. Clay, what's your take on that as an American? I mean, you're very digitally savvy and you're all for it, but do you find it as in like living in New Zealand? Do you think it's quite parochial?
Well, I just remember when I moved over to New York, I used to work in the World Trade Center, and I was over there in 2000 and 2001, and I was working in a SaaS company, and I booted up hoovers.com and just interested in my marketing universe. And I figured out that I could work the rest of my life and not see all the businesses on one street in New York City.
Right.
Okay. The rest of my life and not see all the businesses just on one street. So it's a numbers game there. And thankfully it's not here, but that shouldn't let us be complacent about cyber criminals attacking who they're going to attack.
Agree, yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the government needs to lead the way more through the NZ Cert is great. I think there's more that they could be doing to show, to put into place things that we can all make use of.
So I'd like to, before I stop the recording,
sure,
I'd like to again say thank you very much, Anthony, for coming on the Relationship Show. And I would like to carry on this dialogue specifically about identity and security with you and Richard and me and my team to see how we can work together to again best serve people here.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for having me on the show. Thank you.
Fantastic. I'll stop the recording and send it to you.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks for your time. Thanks for coming on.
No worries.